And again, welcome everyone. I am going to introduce the three folks that we have here to share their experiences with downtown disruptions, which those who have been through it may giggle a little bit about the nice way to put that. Just a little disruption, but we are going to hear some stories from Mary Hodson with the Hutchinson Area Chamber of Commerce in Minnesota, Andrea Powers, Southern Hills Economic Development Corporation in South Dakota, and Mandy Hegwood with Laurel Main Street in Mississippi. And we are very much looking forward to hearing your experiences. One of the ways that this topic came up is last year I was speaking at our Rotary Club, and Ted McGreer, who is a Main Street business owner, he's here with us today. Hi, Ted. Came up to me afterward and he was like, you know, the model that you're using to deal with issues, we should really think about hosting a conversation about this topic because it is one that we in Keene, New Hampshire are going to go through very shortly ourselves. And so we thought, you know, if we are going to be dealing with this, there's likely other folks who are also going to be dealing with this. And why recreate the wheel? Let's get everyone together and have a chat about it. So that's what we're doing. And so I will go ahead, each of the three folks that I mentioned will tell a little bit about their story, and then we'll have ideally 45 minutes for Q&A and discussion. And if any of you that are here with us also have stories to share that you would like to share during that time, feel free, because we want to learn from everyone. One of the things we're excited about is after this, we're hoping to have a little Google Drive folder with some templates, resources, and just really like pragmatic things that we can use and share freely with anyone who might need them. So we'll be distributing that after this as well. All right, so I'm going to kick it over to Mary, and thank you all for being here with us.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for making the time to be here or to watch this webinar. I am from Hutchinson, Minnesota, and I was previously the president and CEO of the Hutchinson Area Chamber of Commerce. And we had a project called Main Street 2020. And you'll want to just key that in for a little bit. Main Street 2020 was a project that we started in 2017, knowing that we were going to be going through some successful disruptive construction on our Main Street. Our Main Street, however, was a state highway, and the state was redoing the road. And so our Main Street, which runs through that space, was going to be affected. It is the main corridor through our community, so we knew there was going to be a lot of disruptors. The big thing that we did, and there's an outline in those resources, is that we created a binder, and we started very early. The binder went to 133 business and building owners that were downtown and affected by the biggest piece of the construction. Our construction was door to door, so sidewalk, entrance into a building, the curb, and then also reconstructing and relocating water, sewer, fiber, and electrical and gas in some cases. So very extensive. So we created this binder to help people understand the project, who to contact with questions. It was a great opportunity to work on ADA compliance, because if they were going to do anything with their rear entrances when front entrances would be unavailable, they were going to need to know about ADA compliance. And so we even had somebody that created a survey for them, and then would actually go to their business and walk through with them. We had marketing strategies in there and local marketing opportunities where you could learn more. So it was really extensive. We really tried to be, Juliana's used this great word called pragmatic, right? We want to get down to the nuts and bolts and take out some of the frustration and the human reaction and emotions to some of this, so we could just be straightforward about what needed to be done and when it needed to be done. Now, I said it was Main Street 2020. Of course, that changed in March of 2020. our plans had to shift and pivot, like all of you know how to pivot so well. And we became a source of information. But there was a lot of pieces that we'd put in place that were even more important now. Weekly and monthly emails. We would do phone calling with updates if there was something that was happening outside of the timeline that they were given. Obviously, COVID did a double dip on our businesses, but at least it happened at once in one time instead of separating them out one year to another. So that's really the gist of what happened. We had lots of plans. And again, what I'm going to tell you is take whatever you can from today. And if you need it, use it, tweak it to your own community's needs. If you don't need it, that's great. If you have a very faith-filled community like we did, the state couldn't do anything that was religious based, but we had blessings. So we had different people from parts of our faith community come and do blessings. That was really important to them. And the state just stood back because it wasn't their thing. And that worked out really well. Collaboration is such a huge piece. It's about communication. And so you can't over communicate in projects like these. And we were very fortunate to have state, county, city, regional people in the same space with our task force. And we were able to help even when it came to signage, to getting people who might be on I don't know if you all in your different parts of the country have detours that go around your city instead of through your city. We literally had our road shut down. So there were things that were off away. So we were able to even put in signage to help our downtown businesses get people there. So that's just a huge overview. But if you can educate your businesses to be prepared, and you can educate your public and your visitors to still utilize these businesses during this time, I think that's the biggest piece that I can extend to you right now in this quick moment.
Thank you so much. I am curious, Mary, before we go on to Andrea, what were the components of the binder?
The binder was about contact. It was about context of the project and why it was happening. Remember, these people not only are going to be frustrated because they have their businesses and access to it shut down, but in our state, in our city, they're also being assessed for the improvements. And so making sure that they understood the chamber couldn't do anything about being assessed, but here's the person that you can talk to at the city for being assessed. The city can't do anything about what the sidewalk looks like, but they have agreement with the state. So here's the person at the state to talk to. So we had all of those contact information pieces. We had the marketing piece, right? How to reach out to your customers, how to reach new customers, how to work with the chamber and use your chamber resources if you were a chamber member, or if you're a member of downtown or your Main Street organization. We also had a lot of information about ADA and just the extent of the project itself. So they knew exactly what was happening.
That's wonderful. And then as the project went on, since that was like a physical binder you gave everyone, right? Did the rest of it come kind of through electronic communication, or did you print and deliver more things?
Well, the plan was to print and deliver, so they had it there and they weren't missing emails. But because of 2020 pandemic, we were emailing more and giving them updates. Up until that point, we were able to deliver more information as we had it. You know, maybe an engineer left and somebody else took their place. We made sure that they had updated information at all times. The other piece that we put in there was about grants and business loans. So if your back entry access is not customer friendly, how can you make it more customer friendly? But of course, if you're going to make those adjustments, it also needs to be 20% of your project needs to be toward more compliance toward ADA. So there was a lot of education about that. But then we had city from our EDA grants for facade improvement, a facade improvement grant and a sign and awning. Let me say that again. Facade improvement loans and sign and awning grants. And that allowed people to be able to put signage so people could find them. We also, to help them in that wayfinding, offer the tour, but also parking lots that people didn't always utilize are in the back of the buildings. So people get a little confused, like in a community of 15,000, you don't want to walk too far. So put it in perspective. We always say, well, if you're in Minneapolis, you're going to walk 10 times farther than if you go park in the parking lot, right? So we wanted to make sure people knew where what parking lot would service what business is as close as possible. So that wayfinding was really important as well.
I love that you said that, because that was the last question I was going to ask you, was about the back entrances. And although you can't see the city of Keene staff on video since they're in a conference room together, I bet they were smiling when you said that about, what people are willing to walk in rural areas. So that is super helpful. And
Yeah.
the funding sources that you used for the awning signage and the facade, like if any of those are still active, like if you want to drop them in the chat, I'm sure that would be super helpful.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Because I love that idea. It's a great opportunity to spruce up the back entrances and make those usable. Okay. Oh, go ahead.
That took some creativity for some businesses, right? Businesses do this because this is how I've always done it. And so we had a jewelry store and they're like, well, we can't because that's where our big safe is.
Mm-hmm.
Lock the safe. Put up curtains and walk people through. They're like, oh,
yeah.
well, we could do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it just takes an extra set of eyes sometimes. And that was where our committee really was helpful for people.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
we'll skip to a different part of the country now and fly over, swim wherever to South Dakota. And Andrea, welcome. Oh, you're muted.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. I'm Andrea Powers. I am from the very southwestern tip of South Dakota in the Black Hills of South Dakota. You may remember that from Rocky Raccoon if you're old enough. My town is about 3,800, so I have empathy with we don't want to walk all the way from the parking lot. In Hot Springs, we want to get out the car door and step into the front door of the business. So that's always an interesting piece for the community. So our road reconstruction started in February of 22, and it's just finishing up this month with a few minor repairs. So it's been a 3-year process. It covered over 2 miles of highway that went all the way through the town, the main thoroughfare that covered all of Main Street. And the interesting thing about our community is that we're in a very narrow valley. So we really don't have much in the way for backdoor access. Many of our buildings are up against a very, very steep hill. Can you show the next photo? Yes, so these are pictures of very typical buildings in our downtown area. They're all historic sandstone built at the turn of the century, 1900s, 1880s forward. And so when DOT came through, the first thing that they did was seismic measurements on all these buildings to see how much they could stand in the way of vibrations before all the work started. And they also came through and took pictures of everything for damage and insurance purposes. The next picture, please. So our first area to be done was a little short dogleg turn in the state highway that's called Jennings Avenue. And that road was the only road that was completely shut down because it was the only road that was possible to do a detour through. You can see the original culvert on the right-hand side, and then the new culvert that was being put in. And just like Hutchinson, it was a door-to-door reconstruction, all the pipes, all the fiber, the electricity, the sewage, everything. And a lot of our stuff was actually old cast iron because it had never been repaired before. And when things were dug up, you would touch them and they would literally crumble into pieces. It was amazing. Next piece, please. So that's the whole length of our reconstruction, including that historical downtown area. One of the interesting things we learned is that when DOT comes through and redoes your state highway, it doesn't matter what your city has done in terms of bringing charm and atmosphere for us to that Victorian type of architecture and light posts. None of that goes back. They restore it to state highway grade, and that's it. So where the funding to put that back comes from, the bump outs with the trees and gardens and the beautiful Victorian light posts, that has to come from somewhere. And our situation, the city chose to pay for it. And we're very lucky that way because this is happening in other cities across other towns across the state now. And people have no idea that that's not going back in. They're having to start their own private foundations to do fundraising to put those things back in. So that's something to bear in mind when you begin this process. The next picture. So DOT, that's the Jennings Avenue section that was completely shut off. And this small block is all retail, and those folks chose to have their own set of advertising because they had a year unto themselves just for that small block, and nothing else was being done in town. So they did all their own advertising and store specials as a unit, which was a pretty cool thing, and it was very organic. The next picture, please. DOT put in $31 million for this 2-mile process. One of the things that our previous mayor pushed and pushed until it was finally agreed to was the notion of a cantilevered sidewalk on the river side of the main street. Originally, we had no sidewalk over there. So when you pulled in and parked, you literally stepped out of your car into the middle of the street. The positive about that is that everybody in town came to a screeching halt if they saw one person step out into the street. It was very friendly that way, very pedestrian friendly. But they did finally approve and fund this cantilevered sidewalk that hangs over the river. So on the left-hand side, you can see from the riverside what it looked like prior. You can see cars just parked right up against that retaining wall. And on the on the right-hand side is the new sidewalk that with the cantilevered section. The river itself, that whole stream bed is owned by the Corps of Engineers. And so the city had to take over this sidewalk portion and make sure that all the support structure was on the city portion, not in the Corps of Engineers portion. They would not bear the insurance costs for that. So it was pretty complicated. The next picture, please. Is that my last one?
All of them.
All right. Okay. So anything else I wanted to talk to? Historic. Let's see. I think that was pretty much everything.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I was kind of curious. So Mary brought up the blessings that were done during the process. Was there anything that your community used to mark progress or success as you went? And what felt important about that? What would you have done more of?
So it was interesting to hear Mary talk. In our case, the company that was actually doing the work had daily email updates, weekly meetings in town. And each of these updates covered the route through town, which changed daily. So it was interesting because the folks who visit our town, it's a very tourist driven town, they weren't really bothered by by the traffic issues. But those of us who lived here, it was changing daily and sometimes multiple times a day for 3 years. So it was really important to get those email updates on a daily basis. And they did a great job of that. They even went so far, like the road construction teams, they would stop and help whatever store had product coming in off the semi. They would help unload it into the store so they could go ahead and move the semi on down the street. It was kind of a fascinating process and very neighborly.
That's great to
Andrea,
hear.
I
Okay.
hate to jump in, but Andrea, I think that's such a great takeaway for everybody who's not been through this process yet, is that, and I have that in all my notes, visitors don't think twice about it because they
Right.
don't know what happens every day. But your people who go to the same cafe every day,
Mhm.
they get the same parking spot, they go to the same store, they have
Yes.
their routines, they will stop those routines if we
Yes,
don't
they
help
will.
them. And it's difficult to get them back in those routines.
Mm.
It's true. And we even had a couple of coffee shops utilize, they got loaned a parking lot that was a private parking lot for their customers. And still those customers would not come because they expected to park right in front of the door.
Mm. So that takes some creative thinking too on
Yes,
how to
it does.
help folks adjust their routines and not give them up altogether. Um, that's a really good point. And I'm curious, so in addition to like the daily updates and things like that, did you throw a party when it was done? How did you ritualize or mark success?
So at the end of February, we are going to have a burn the construction cone party. And yes, Mary, you can steal that. The fire department is on board. Our forestry, wildland fire department is on board. The city's going to be building a giant construction cone, orange with the white stripes, all non-toxic material. And we're going to burn it on a winter evening and invite, especially all those retail folks up and down the street who managed to survive this, and the community who have endured it with grace and aplomb, to come have a party.
I love that. Will you send us pictures when you do it?
Okay.
Yeah, we'll share them. I love that. Wonderful. Okay, so we will move over to Mandy, and then I have a couple of questions for everyone, and then we'll open it up to the whole group for Q&A. So welcome, Mandy. And I should also mention that she is a very, very last minute speaker because Caroline, who was going to be with us, had something she had to attend to. So thank you so much for joining us, Mandy. And from what I understand, I don't watch a lot of TV, but your community is pretty special, right? There's some there's some awareness of your community, and I'd love to just hear a little bit about your community and then the project you had to go through and just get to know you a little bit better. So thank you for joining us.
So you may have heard of Laurel, Mississippi. There is a TV show that is filmed here, Hometown on HGTV. So we do have a lot of great things in our town other than the show, but the show has definitely elevated us to another level and has been really great for our community. So we would love to have you visit Laurel and see our downtown. It is a really special place, but having grown up here, it's kind of surreal that, you know, it is on TV. It's kind of weird, but it is a great town. And so the project, I'm a little different than some of the other panelists that you've talked to or that have talked, because I'm an engineer. That's my day job. And so I am responsible for construction, not just dealing with the aftermath, but I'm responsible for designing and implementing and in causing, I guess, the construction that has happened in our downtown. And so in doing so, you know, I wear my engineer hat a lot, and then but I'm also the president of our Laurel Main Street. And so I kind of wear two hats a lot of the time. And when we were doing our construction project, I would constantly put on my engineer hat and then have to put on the Laurel Main Street hat. And I will say, I think that we underestimated, as an engineer, I underestimated the amount of community involvement that we would have to do. And so we really were so thankful that our Main Street group stepped up and stepped in and took on the community involvement role that they did, because we could not have made it through this construction project without a very active Main Street group. It was so helpful and so important. Communication is definitely the most important thing, is over communicating. I think that is what Mary said, you know, you cannot over communicate. And that is so true. What we ended up doing is we use social media. I love Mary's idea of putting a binder out. That would have been a wonderful thing for us to do in the beginning. But we use social media. We created a private social media group for our downtown merchants that were affected by construction. And we posted in that group weekly, with weekly updates. And so we did not put it out on a public social media forum. We chose to keep it private, just to kind of, for lots of reasons that you can imagine. So, but we did keep it a private group. And we would put weekly updates as to what would be happening the next week. Because from my perspective as an engineer, we would say, okay, well, we're going to have, you know, make water connections, you know, the next week. Well, I understand what that means as an engineer. A business owner does not necessarily understand all the implications of what that means. What that means is water shutdowns temporarily. And so if you own a restaurant, then that is detrimental to a day of your business. And so we had to really spell that out in, we couldn't just say there's going to be water connections in this block of the project. We had to really be specific about what kind of impacts each of those items of work would be. And so we had to really, break that down on a very elementary level as to what those items of work would entail. And something else, that signage is something that we were very specific about. We would bring in signage to direct people to the businesses when the businesses were going to be open, what their hours were. We put signage on the sidewalks. We used just different banners, anything that we could do to direct people to where the businesses were and when they were open. I don't know what slides Caroline gave you, so if you want to.
These are just all the pictures thrown together.
Okay, perfect. So these are just different pictures of construction and, completed work. One of the things that we did, that we have a wind down event that is held throughout our city, and I don't think it's shown in any of these particular pictures, but we chose to do a bingo event again at one of our wind downs. And so we created a bingo card, and on that bingo card were all of the businesses that were in the construction area. And so if you went to, different businesses in the, and basically it was like a bingo card thing, the game bingo. But if you went to the different businesses in, on the bingo card and, got them to stamp that you went in their business, at the end of the night, you turn your bingo card in, and then you were eligible to, for a drawing of a gift card. And so what we were trying to do was create traffic for these businesses that people were kind of avoiding because of construction. So our entire downtown was not affected by construction, but one particular area was. And so what we found was that people were avoiding the construction area, but go into the area that was not in construction. And so we were trying to draw people into the area where construction was with this bingo card. And it worked. I mean, the businesses says that they saw a lot of, activity, you know, because of the bingo card, and it was really popular. We have, we're about to begin a second phase of this project and, go into the next block and kind of a rinse and repeat type project and, do the second phase of it. So kind of holding my breath, but we have gotten much better feedback. And I think that it's because people can see the end result. And they already know what to expect, they know what's coming, and they're not quite as apprehensive about it because they know what, you know, they know what to expect. And so I think that everybody has a little better outlook about the whole process in general.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. So second phase of how many total phases?
Right now, this is the only phase that is currently funded.
Okay. Mhm.
So we've got, I mean, there's another project that we would love to do, but we don't have the funding in place for it at this time.
Okay, yeah. And then those wind down events where you did the bingo cards, was that like a one-time thing or did you do it regularly?
We did, so we still currently have, our wind downs. We have a spring series and a fall series, so we do a total of, 6 a year. We
Mhm.
don't still do the bingo cards though.
But you did them multiple times during the project or
We
just
did.
once during the project?
No, we did them multiple times during the project.
Okay, all right, that's
We
great.
continued with our normal wind down events.
Mhm.
At the time was a summer event. We have since moved it to a spring and a fall series, but, it's a monthly, like a wine tasting where you walk around with you get a glass of wine and you walk around and get a tasting of wine at different businesses.
Got it.
So,
Okay.
we continued with the same thing. We just added the bingo card.
Great. And did you have any of the same sorts of things that Mary was talking about with utilizing back entrances or wayfinding signage to get people there, like anything like that you could add?
Definitely. We put up as much signage as we could, but we also tried to empower our businesses to, you know, use social media on their own, do their own, you know, reels, anything that they could do on their own, because what we tried to let them know is you can't depend on Laurel Main Street to do all of your promotion for you. Like it is, you have to promote yourself, and you've got to be a little more creative than you normally are
Mm-hmm.
to promote your business in this time. So
That's great.
you've got to, as a business owner, you have to go a little above and beyond, because it is, you know, it is kind of a downtime because of construction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And so we try to empower them as much as possible.
that's great. And when you finished phase one, did you mark it with any sort of celebration or ritual?
We did. We had a parade with golf carts and police and fire trucks. And so we just kind of, it was the first time that the street had been open to two-way traffic in probably 40 or 50 years. And so it had always been one way. And so we paraded, you know, with traffic.
Both directions.
In both directions, yes.
That's great. Okay, very cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing, and you did a great job, especially not having a lot of preparation time. And I love that you have the perspective, both from the engineer perspective and from, you know, helping communicate with downtown businesses and all of that. Okay, so I have 2 questions for all 3 of you. And then we'll open it up to everyone else. And, you know, that'll keep us right on schedule with that. I did want to just say, I did see Deb Brown's camera come on, and I just wanted to give her and Save Your Town, which is her organization, along with Becky McCrae, I think I said that right. And just give her a shout out, because when we started the process of working on this roundtable and gathering folks, I knew that I was going to go straight to them and say, do you know of anyone? Because they are just a phenomenal resource. And what I love about Save Your Town is that they have such practical, hands-on, low barrier ideas and models, and just really, really appreciate what they do. They got right on a Main Street Happy Hour Facebook group they're a part of, and got us lots of really good names, and just appreciate everything that they do. And that's the power of collaboration, and especially in rural communities, you know, we don't have a lot of density, each and every one of us ourselves, but together we create a really beautiful and dense community, and rich and full of resources that we can share with each other.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for being here. Okay, so we've gotten a lot of nuggets. I'm just writing things down left and right. Be specific in your communication. Can't communicate too much. Burn the construction cone. At businesses advertising together as a unit, working together as a unit. Using your back entrances. The list just goes on and on. We've got a lot of really good just tips and tricks and ideas and models. I would say though, my next question is, what would you do differently if you could go back and start it again? Not that you'd want to, let's not go too far there, but what would you do differently?
I would have a more organized plan of communication. We failed to do that on our project. And so I love Mary's idea of the binder that you handed out. I thought you had a great communication plan, and we failed to do that. And I think that we, even though we had meetings up front where we communicated the project and the intent, we did all of those things in the front of our project. And I felt like we communicated what the project goals were and what the end of our project was going to look like. We did not communicate the process and what the inconveniences of construction would look like, and how the business owner should navigate the construction. We communicated what the end game and what the end result would look like, but not how they would navigate their business during the process. And so that I would do that differently.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Mary, Andrea?
I have a comment and a question for the rest of the panel. One of the issues that we had was breaking of water mains and flooding of the basements of people's businesses, for which there is no money out there. And there was an expectation that those costs would be paid for by some other entity besides their insurance. What would be the best practice approach to get people who own businesses to check out their insurance before all this starts to happen? That's something that I feel like we should have addressed, and it was not addressed until it was in motion.
You know, Andrea, when you were talking about having buildings that might not be able to sustain the tremor and the friction of the machinery and the work, they went and they took pictures of every single basement. They took video of every single basement. They cataloged all of it. They made sure they understood where everybody's main pipes were coming from. And then they talked about making sure that people, the businesses, the building owners understood where that line was.
Yes.
We ensure to hear after this, you have to make sure that you have insurance. So that's what we did on our end.
And I'm sure that the company they took all the interior pictures as well. But as you say, they are not liable for damages that happen once you cross that threshold. And that was very difficult for a number of our business owners to digest.
Yeah, I think that they actually handed them information as well, because you only hear what you're hearing for, and you only see what you're looking for.
Yes.
And so I think that that's why over communication is so important, is to make sure that you say it once, you say it twice, you say it however they hear. And Mandy, I'll say the binders worked really well, because if that business or building was moved or sold, we asked them to share it with the next tenant.
Mm.
And so it wasn't a loss of communication through emails in the end.
Right, and that's a great idea, because we did our, a lot of our meetings, you know, during the planning and design stages of our project. But then there were business and owner changes from the time that we got from our design and planning stages to the time we got to construction. Because I mean, it was a, you know, federally funded project, so you know, it was a long project. So
Right.
it, you know, there were definitely changes in hands of property through that process. And so some people said, well, I never knew about the project. And so, but the time between our meetings and, you know, the time of construction was a long time.
That's an excellent point. Yeah.
Juliana, to answer your question, I reached out to a number of chambers whose communities had gone through something like this, where it was a state highway on their main street, because it's very different
Yes.
when you are involving different entities, because it's also a county, then it becomes a county road, right? And the one thing I would do different is find something like this that we're doing right now, where you can hear from people in different states who have different ideas. Because the cone, I mean, we wouldn't have been able to do it in 2020, but the cone burning is like genius. So we were going to have block parties. I know, chef's kiss.
My idea. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. You get the credit. We were going to have a block party before and after. We had them themed. We had all of our events themed that year. So our golf tournament was going to be construction themed. I'm pretty sure we still have orange tablecloths in the basement, right? But we planned everything around that theme to help people understand that this is a big deal, and using that time to educate people to support them.
Well, and that's an interesting thing. So if you still have materials that you never used, if there's any communities who would use them, would you be willing to like share? I don't know how that works, but you know, just
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's tongue in cheek, right? We've actually given some things away to other communities closer who have needed those. Because, I mean, rip off it in the chamber world, it's rip off and duplicate. So if there's any
Yeah.
chambers here, rip off and duplicate, make it your own, and take whatever you can and utilize it, right? I thought Andrea's picture of, so you could see where the old culverts versus the new, the piping, that was our 6 to 9 blocks of all of that. And so we don't have great pictures because those were happening during COVID when we weren't allowed in our offices, but that's what it looked
Yeah.
like.
So I have one. Oh, go ahead, Andrea.
I have one other thing that I wish I could have done and did try to do. I just couldn't get enough ground to do it. So we had these that were in every building, and that's nice. Everybody can see what it's going to look like, right? But when you go into a large community, when a new development's going up, it's a billboard, right? That's really what we needed. So people who are traveling through could say, oh, that's the end goal. And those of us who live here every day would have to look it in the face and say, yes, this is where we are going, in large bold print, billboard size, not for people going down the highway outside our community, but for the people who are right in it.
Yeah, keeping that end goal in mind, and that
The
probably
vision
helps
board.
the morale.
Yes.
Yeah. So I imagine that, you know, a lot of folks that are here, there's a lot of perspectives represented here, right? You have folks that are in charge of the project. You have folks from the city or the county or the state. You have business owners that are worried about their businesses. You have organizations that are trying to support the businesses going through it. So there's a lot of entities and perspectives here. So I know that there's going to be a lot of great conversation in the Q&A. But if everyone could just like super high level, just describe the type of entity that they were a part of when they went through this, which I think folks mentioned when they introduced themselves, but then what other entities were you working with when you went through this? Because I know every community and state is a little bit different in how they do things, because I think that could help with the questions that are going to be coming, knowing the entities that had to work together in your particular place.
So we decided that we would have a task force, which that word in my world means short term. In other people's definition, that means something is terribly wrong and we need to fix it. And that wasn't our intent, but that very quickly got the city's attention, the city engineer, the project engineers. And then that's how we ended up when we were having our task force meetings with businesses and marketers and people from the business side of the community. That's how we ended up in the same room with city, county, state officials. So then they were then asking our opinion. I don't think they would have asked our opinion otherwise. And we had their ear every week or every other week. And that, although it kind of fell into place where they were scared we were going to try to stop them, that wasn't the intent at all. But it worked out to our advantage to be able to say, hey, you know, we really need to make some signage on 2nd Street to get people down because that's now open. Well, it's time to get some signage down on 5th. How can we make that happen? And so I think that it's making sure that you have all the players, representatives of each of the impacted areas.
I think it's important that you involve, if you have a Main Street group or a chamber, I mean, whoever that organization is, you think you've got to involve them because, I mean, from an engineer's perspective, it's probably not in their contract to do, you know, PR and marketing and like that's not where their mindset is. And and the only reason it probably ever crossed my mind at all is because of my involvement as president of Laurel Main Street. And I'll say I didn't do as good a job with it as I wish I had. But had I not been involved in Laurel Main Street at all, I don't know that I would have even thought about it because my first train of thought is an engineer. So you know, if you're leaving it up to the people who are designing your construction projects to handle it, it's probably not going to get done.
And Mandy, that's what we found because we started early and we started 3 years early, that the contract actually had written into it a community liaison or a business liaison. So then we had that built in, and our district, so MnDOT is divided out into districts. Our district started doing that on a regular basis and asking people to get information from us or to do something similar because they found that in the end, although yes, we were maybe a pain in their backside a little bit, because we asked a lot of questions and it was another meeting they had to go to. In the end, it was so much smoother because they had access to everybody's emails. They had access to us. We used our social media. We could get out information out very, very quickly.
Well,
so good for you, Mandy.
Yeah, you gotta check. You gotta find out, you know, who's doing it, who's on first on this, because it can easily get dropped.
And our contractor had its own liaison and marketing element too, which was agreed to beforehand. Yeah, it was great. It took a huge load off of us.
That is wonderful. Ours did not.
Well, and our chamber decided to put in, recognizing that was such a big deal to so many of our businesses, because although the Main Street portion was such a big portion, all the way down through town and the businesses were going to be impacted just a little bit on a lighter basis. So they had dedicated a chunk of money for us. We did do billboards, Andrea. So we said we're still open and watch for the specific signs. So when MnDOT did signs, they actually put our logo on it. So people could follow billboard to sign to then the downtown parking signs. And so it was branded so they could follow easily enough. Yes, they put their MnDOT all over it. That's fine, but people could still kind of follow the breadcrumbs to where they needed to go.
And I will say, even though, you know, because we are not because nobody had that specifically outlined in our contract, we are a small enough community that everybody knows everybody. And so whenever the contractor's out there, like you said, somebody's unloading somebody else's, trucks trying to get stuff, that did happen a lot, within our project. And it was really community helping community. And we did see that over and over and over because, it is such a small rural community where everybody knows everybody. And so you did have a lot of that happening.
I find it really interesting that we've had that mentioned twice because we spoke with someone who loves to come to Radically Rural in Plymouth, New Hampshire. And when we went to go visit her in Plymouth, they were under construction. And so I went to her when we were planning this and was like, tell me about it. And their communication was not whoever was directing the project, their communication was very slow to come online. And so there ended up needing to be just like a group of downtown business owners that kind of got together and just said, well, no one's doing it, so we're going to do it, and started doing those daily updates. But she specifically said working with a construction company that is friendly was important because of that, like, oh, hey, let me get the door for you, and they can't always do that. But I think just the neighborliness cannot be overstated for any aspect of the project. And so I'd love to.
We had a coffee shop that started, delivering coffee every morning to the construction workers. And
I love that.
The result of that was that they would start going in and buying coffee throughout the day. They'd get their first cup of coffee for free, and then throughout the day, the construction workers would go and buy coffee. And so it kind of became a win-win and a relationship that happened. And so,
there's some really beautiful reciprocity there too.
That's right.
And I'm sure a lot of the questions from those who are attending will be about, how to drive business to the businesses that are there. As we open up, thank you all for answering those. And as we open up for group discussion, I did want to provide an opportunity if Katie wanted to expand on their point from the chat. If not, that's totally fine. But my family is actually in Western North Carolina and did also go through Hurricane Helene and all of the devastation. And I'm very much feeling for you with what you have been through. And the fact that power just came on in your office 2 weeks ago is just wild. And as I give you an opportunity, if you do want to expand on that, to talk about like the importance of the physical and digital copies, I did want to mention and just put a plug for a roundtable we did in August about when disasters hit home, how local journalism can build resilient communities during emergencies. But in there's a very cool sort of like radio system that communities can kind of get in place before disasters so that they can communicate with each other when there's no other opportunity to do so. So I'll just put a plug in for that if anyone wants to go back and watch that recording. Lily, maybe you can plug that in the chat. Oh, there you go. And so Katie, did you want to expand on that?
Sure. Hi. So, we had the storm come through September 27th, which was a Thursday, and the water rose up 30 feet. And so all of our lower street businesses here in Spruce Pine, which we are super tiny, but it's funny because when I was looking at the map of Hot Springs, South Dakota, it's physically very similar. We have a river, and then we have a walking bridge that goes to our little lower street and upper street. And there's a park on one side of it. So it looks very similar. But all of our lower street businesses were lost. My office had 8.5 feet of water in it. All of our paper copies of everything that we had and my laptop are gone. Everything was gone. And I never would have thought that there would be 8.5 feet of water. I mean, the river is like way down, but what you guys have gone over today, it seems like it would be a very good thing for all of us to think about preparing all of this information in advance, even if we're not having construction, because when the communication lines fell apart, and we still don't have internet down at my office either, it became very problematic. And it's still problematic for a lot of our businesses. We've been struggling with, who has what information. And we do social media, we are on the radio, and we are in the newspaper. But it's still, that is the big challenge. But I think this information is great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I will look at that other video too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We had one question that in the chat that was direct message to me, which is how long before construction began was the Hutchinson binder available? I think that's for Mary. Yeah.
Our project was scheduled to start spring of 2020, and we started in the summer of 2017 because we knew that there were several businesses that were going to have to do a true renovation, and we didn't want them doing them last minute before the project. So we started very early once we knew we had a date that was firm with the state. Great question.
I imagine that even if there are folks that are a little like they don't have 3 years, they would still be useful, just possibly not as much opportunity for like those major renovations or anything like that.
We knew what our back alleys looked like, right?
Yeah.
So that's why we started when we did. I would say that if Andrea said that they didn't have a lot of back entrances. We had people having conversations that they weren't willing to have previously. We have a code that says you have to have 2 entrances to your building, but we had a couple that didn't. And so those were conversations with their building owners to be able to even keep themselves safe, because, okay, maybe it's not construction, maybe it's a fire, and you need to have those things. So it allowed people to have conversations that made them stronger, safer. But yeah, and just for them to be thinking ahead of time about what the marketing is going to look like for themselves.
That's great. All right, what other questions do we have from the audience?
So I'm a marketer at heart because everything always comes back to marketing, right? I wonder, did anybody do shopping tours in the midst of it? I know Mary has back alleys in her community. Wouldn't it have been fun to take a group of people down the alley to do a shopping tour or something like that? Has anybody done that?
So Deb, I love you.
I do.
You guys, if you don't know Deb, you need to follow Deb. I consider her a dear friend. Because it was 2020, we couldn't do tours and things like that. That had been the plan, is that we would have back alley parties and do a block at a time and really kind of love on those businesses in that space. So what we did is we did backdoor tours on video and showed people, this is the parking lot, and this is actually the back entrance of Carly Shoes, and look for this and look for that. So if you need to come and get your safety shoes, you still can. Those were really popular and businesses really appreciated them. And then what we would do is we'd sneak through to the front and get video of what it looked like out front for people to realize, okay, this is why it's shut down right now.
Thank you.
Our detour, because we were trying to keep traffic flowing through the area at all times during construction, and so but it was kind of tricky, and so we did have somebody actually drive the route with somebody videoing at the time and put that drive on a social media so that you could see, okay, if you're going and you want to, get downtown, this is how you get there. And this is the detour route that you take, so that it was not quite as complicated, because all with the barrels everywhere, sorry. With all of the construction barrels, it just kind of looked like barrels everywhere. And so it was kind of hard to see where you entered through the barrels and how you got into the downtown, the actual street. So we had somebody kind of drive the route and so that you could see where to go, if that makes any sense. But not video and drive at the same time.
Hey, Juliana, can I have a question?
Sure. We've got Amy has her hand raised, and we'll come right back. Yep. Go ahead, Amy.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks so much for putting this together. It's been super helpful. I'm in Massachusetts. We have a small historic Main Street. And my question you started to touch on a minute ago, and that was this property owner versus business owner issue. We have a lot of business owners who are tenants, and some of these things that you're talking about doing with the property, I think might require property owner approval, and there's not always great communication. So I don't know if you had any either opportunities that this sort of construction might present to increase communication with property owners, or things that went awry or red flags you'd like to throw in my direction.
I will say, thank you for the question. So we had to make sure that we knew who the tenant was and who the building owner was. And we took that information, and then we specifically told building owners that they needed to make sure they were sharing with their tenants, even though we were giving the information to tenants. We did that because we knew that there was going to be a lack of communication, because there typically is. However, we did see a couple that were able to forge a relationship that they hadn't previously had, because they were recognizing that there was a need of the building, or the building, maybe it was not prepared for the water that was going to be coming through there and had not previously been done. Because if you hooked up, all water was going to the front of the buildings and away from the back of the buildings. So if you didn't do that hookup and get it prepared ahead of time, it was going to cost you a lot more money. So there was a lot more conversation in that. But many buildings are leased, and we had that communication with many of them.
Thanks.
Andrea or Mandy, did you have anything to add to that? Tips or tricks with those kinds of relationships?
Most of our buildings were owner occupied, so I really can't speak to it.
We had very similar experience as Mary. We found that we had to communicate with both the owner and the tenant, because if you only did one, then the information would not really get back to who it needed to. So we felt like it was important to identify both the owner, but also communicate with whoever was occupying the space. So we did both.
It's a really good point and a really good question. And I imagine that helping those who are occupying the space, or the tenants, to pitch what they needed done to the owner as like, hey, there's this opportunity for you to improve the value, of your building, and for future tenants in this project. So that's a great question though. So we've got Paige and then Ted in line. So go ahead, Paige.
Good afternoon, y'all. So we're in Starkville, Mississippi, and we are hopeful to break ground either maybe late March. But we've been talking about this project for a really long time. I'm in the role of Main Street Director, so I would be more of like business support. So my question is, we are hopeful that our project will kind of snake in that no two sides of the street or no block at the same time will be disrupted. So for those of you who have gone through this process, like I know Laurel, it kind of looked like, everything was out at the same time, but were there any, maybe, do you have any advice or like tips as far as if one side of the street's open and how those businesses can help the other and vice versa? I guess like any kind of strategy for that. I visited Athens, Georgia when they were doing the Clayton Street project, and it honestly, it looked like to me like anywhere there was any kind of cones or anything like that, people steered away, whether it was one side of the street or not. But just wanted to get any insight about that.
Okay.
Hey, Mandy, you're doing great.
Yeah. So in the first phase of our project, we tried really hard to do one side of the street and then do the other side of the street. And honestly, it seemed to prolong construction. What we have decided to do in the second phase of our project is kind of rip the Band-Aid off, and we're going to do both sides of the street for a block and get that done, and then move on to the next block. And we talked to some of the business owners, and they were like, yeah, we think that would be better. So we'll be shutting that entire block down to traffic completely, whereas before. We try to keep traffic moving through that block, vehicular traffic. And now we will still keep pedestrian traffic open so that the people can still walk, you know, to, it'll be a very narrow sidewalk, but they will still have access to the businesses at all times. It will be through a construction zone. It won't be like a pretty, you know, real convenient walk, but it'll be there. But we will shut the entire street down to traffic. We won't do it like we did in phase 1. So that is one learned lesson that we will take forward in phase 2.
Paige, our project went through 2 engineer changes, and that changed the approach a couple of times. And so we thought that we were going to have a couple of blocks open at a time, and that did not happen. What we did need to have, because of a river that goes through it, is we needed to have intersections open. And so we had 3 main intersections, and one would always be open. And so we had to communicate to people when those sections were open. But we were told that we would get part of it done and then pave it, part of it done and paved. That did not happen because it cost so much to get more paving instead of doing it all at once. And of course, dollars are important, right? And so we had to completely shut down until it was completely paved. And then we opened it. But we always had an intersection open somewhere.
And what came to mind for me just as an idea is I wonder if, you know, you're talking about supporting one side of the street, supporting the other side of the street. I wonder if businesses could have like sister businesses, you know, where when they have like information about the one of the businesses across the street and they talk them up and get people excited about them when they come in the business, or I don't know, it could be a cool way to forge like relationships between businesses. And then it's like, hey, when it's our turn, we got you. Some sort of, you know, I like the bingo game, you know, some sort of like fun way to get folks in the businesses that are on the other side of the street. But I like the idea of kind of pairing businesses together so that they can support each other.
Yeah.
Any ideas from the crowd?
That was one thing that we actually talked about doing, but it never materialized. We were going to do like sister pop-up shops. And so that you could have pop-ups in the non-construction area. It never materialized, but that was one idea that we did have.
So somewhere between our construction and COVID, we ended up with a really great synergistic cross marketing happening really organically downtown. And so businesses would say, hey, if you're visiting us, because typically maybe Clay Coyote has people from outside of Hutchinson, they go, hey, go visit this, this, and this. And then we have a painting studio and they would go, hey, go see this, this, and this. That really became organic, but now is really built into their marketing plans. And we can say it all we want, but until somebody who's on Main Street starts saying it and we should do it, that's when we found that when we had a couple of people say, hey, this works really well. Also, cardboard sign wars are really big and they got a lot of traffic for people. And you're not spending any money because you're using cardboard of the boxes that are being shipped to you. And it's a marker and social media. And that worked really well for a number of our businesses as well.
That's great. Thank you. I've seen towns that also like unrelated to construction have on their marquees, like they have kind of competitions for like the funniest, signs and I'm not doing a good job explaining it, but I think there's a lot that could be played into just friendly competition with signage and things like that. All right, Ted.
Hey, Juliana, thanks for hosting this. This is exactly what we needed to hear. And it's nice that the city of Keene and many cities are listening to some of the insight. I'm a downtown business owner. I'm a property owner. I'm a retailer. And my question for Mandy, Andrea, and Mary is really, I guess, twofold. One, many of us have to buy our goods about a full year in advance. So we have to plan our business about a year out. And with, construction slated for spring of 26, we've got to be ready to go for that. Did you have any feedback or any insight or survey results from your business owners saying what percentage their business was off? And secondly, did you lose any businesses in the process of construction?
We lost one business during our construction. I will say that businesses were down during construction, but we were also during the COVID, cycle as well. So it's hard to say if it was a direct impact for construction, or if it, there were other factors in there also. But construction definitely impacted the area. I mean, there's no way to say that it did not. So, I mean, I don't have a percentage, but definitely it impacted it. But now I will say also there is a restaurant that is right smack in the middle of our construction area. And he would probably tell you that it did not impact him at all. I mean, the entire time he was there, you could not get a seat at his bar. So, people are going to do what people want to do and what they feel is important to them. It's also the only bar in Laurel. People are going to go where they want to go. And, but so it's the best steak and the only bar in Laurel. So, he stayed very busy. So I think people do what's important to them, whether it's construction or not. And, but we did lose one business, unfortunately. But now it's a thriving area of town. So it has not suffered long term.
Ted, most of our businesses reported a 30% reduction, which I had read is the national norm when construction goes through. We did not lose any businesses. A number of our businesses chose to do remodels during that time, so they shut down anyway. And one thing I did observe, which probably doesn't apply to you if you are ordering a year's worth of material, but say our coffee shops, the one that was blocked off with cones and barrels, all the business went to the other one for that period of time. And then when it switched, all the business went to the other coffee shop for that period of time. It's not great for your monthly balance sheet, but it is how it played out.
And Ted, because ours was literally the onset of the pandemic, it would be very hard for me to give you numbers and feel like they were good numbers, because we were kind of hit that double whammy. But I will say a lot of people use that time. They planned on doing construction projects or remodeling projects. They planned on losing 20 to 40% of their business. So they were making plans for that. So Andrea, to your point of 30 across the nation, that would be on point for what they had planned for.
That's helpful. And I know a lot of businesses couldn't necessarily afford to do this, but speaking of that time to take advantage and renovate, it could also be time to take advantage of rest if they haven't had that in a while, and just embrace it for a week or two or however long. And but I like the idea of the pop-ups, even though that didn't materialize in, I think, Mandy, were you the one that brought that up? Yeah, it didn't materialize in your case, but I think that's a great idea. That it can be extra effort, but that can be a way to kind of get out of the construction zone a little bit. So we have a question from the city of Keene in the chat. Do you have any recommendations for business insurance that property owners and tenants should carry during construction?
Talk to your insurance agent.
Yeah, it sounds like a very tricky situation. And I think, prior to Andrea's comment, I would have assumed that the person in charge of the project would have covered the damages, but it's, so that's a great thing to give folks a heads up about and do some research about.
And we've already talked about the things that have happened in North Carolina. We know what's happening in California. Every state is going to be very, very different.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Okay, what other questions are there out there? And, if there are no more questions, if folks who are attending have experience with their own projects and they want to share some tips or tricks or what they would have done differently, please feel free.
I have a question. So we're very event and like festival heavy in our community. Or how did your community organizers deal with that beyond just like the day-to-day operations of business? Any special events? I know COVID probably heavily impacted that too for some of you, but any feedback would be cool.
We have a lot of events in our downtown area also in Laurel, and unfortunately a lot of our events take place in what was the construction area. And so we had to relocate those events to a different part of our downtown. But once it was over, we had a special, block party for, we did the parade I mentioned, but we did do a special block party for, that block where we had, vendors and a band and beer truck and all of that kind of stuff. And we invited all of those, I didn't mention that earlier, but we invited all of those businesses to kind of come out on the street and, have a special day of, where we invited the public to come down and, come into their shops. So that was one way we tried to pay back to those vendors and those businesses.
Lily, you're right. We didn't get to have any events. And in Minnesota, we were on a hard shutdown. I know that there were other parts of the country that weren't probably shut down as hard as we were. But the largest events were the chambers and the community festival. So arrangements had been made to move those. We had plans in place ready to go. I think that one of the things when you talk about events too, it's out, like we were going to use it as an opportunity to try a new venue. And so that was kind of a bummer we didn't get to try it. But when you're doing something like this, Mandy saying they have a block party, the cone burning, I think that there is something, and I like how Juliana calls it a ritual. There's got to be something that you do to kind of give closure to it, celebrate it. You've all survived it. And so I think that those things are really important. We didn't get to do that as much. We had the blessings. We took a picture with everybody standing 6 feet apart with our masks on, from a ladder in the middle of the intersection, right? The only thing that we were able to really do is we had 2 police cars drive, be the first vehicle through the city both ways, right? And the traffic could follow it. But I think those little things that you can do for businesses, whether it's delivering the coffee, if it's, we were going to deliver donuts, and do not be afraid or do not be frustrated. We're here with you. Those little kitschy things sometimes can mean a lot just because you're showing your face. So whenever you can in these moments to walk in and go, I see you, I feel it. We see you and appreciate you, and not just an email, not just whatever that is, person to person. We're about relationships, and people need to know that you're there.
I love that. That's super helpful. I'm trying to jot down all these little tips and tricks because Lily, in the shared folder that we end up distributing, we could probably have just a Word doc of ideas, tips, tricks, and anyone can contribute to it, even if you weren't a speaker. But I like the idea of just having kind of an open commons of ideas, because there's just been so many great ones, and I'm sure there's a million more out there too. So, okay, City of Keene, you have your hand raised. The whole city is here with us.
All of us, every one of us. Can you hear us okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
So I think it was Mandy that said that's, during the first phase of the work, you did it in a way where traffic was remaining on one side of the street while you were working on the other and whatnot. And then one of the lessons that you learned was you're just going to rip the Band-Aid off for phase two. We've talked a lot about that. Our project is probably going to be, what we're planning for is a 3-year project, because we've kind of been under the assumption and under the operating parameter that we have to maintain access to our community and our business fronts and whatnot. How receptive were your businesses to that idea of, okay, we're just going to shut the street down entirely, and you're going to have to find a different way for your customers to get into your building?
Well, the first time that we did it, in the first phase, they would not have been receptive when we had shut the entire street down. And so we kept traffic flowing, and we did one side of the street, and then we did the other side of the street. Now, the entire time that we had it open, we had pedestrian traffic flowing. So our project extended up to about a foot from the building. And so we went all the way to about a foot from the face of the building on either side. So the contractor had to maintain access to the front of the buildings, to the entrance at all times. So what they would do is they would kind of rope off the sidewalks, and I mean, it may be a plywood entrance into the door, but they had to have access into the building, into the business at all times. And so they would, they would kind of flip-flop around and in order to create that pedestrian access. But the vehicular access would maintain on one side of the road or the other. And so it kind of became almost like a dirt road because they had to remove, it was an old brick street. And so they had to remove the bricks and all the, and so once they got that built back up to a sub base with asphalt, they flopped to the other side. And so it was a mess. It was an absolute mess. So we decided this time what we're going to do is just remove all of that, maintaining a couple of feet over next to the building so that, people can kind of walk by and get into the building if they want to, or, when they want to, we want them to. But no vehicular access at all until we get it back up to sub base. Now, we will come through the end of the project and put our surface asphalt on all at one time, because Mary is right, it costs more to bring in a little bit of asphalt in sections like that. So we want to asphalt the entire project all at once. But, and it looks better to do it that way. So, but we can bring up the base asphalt in sections. But we're not going to do, this lane and then this lane. That just did not work for us. So, and I think our businesses are okay with that. The ones that we have talked to, we talked to a bunch of them, and they're okay with that. They saw
we've kind of been planning right along what you've described. You have to maintain access to the business. We're probably only going to shut down, maybe up to 25 parking spaces at once, and you have to work in this specific block at a time. But I guess we've never actually tested that assumption that businesses wouldn't tolerate, just shut it all down for the next year and get it all done at once.
But now I will say too, our project limits were only about a block and a half or 2 blocks, and so that was our entire project for phase 1. And then phase 2 is going to be about 2 blocks long.
Right.
So we weren't doing, 9 blocks of an entire street or anything like that. So
yeah, and we're basically planning like a couple of blocks each year for 3 years.
Yeah. So if I were planning a couple of blocks a year, I probably would shut down those 2 blocks, do the whole thing, the full width, maybe keep the intersection open, and or do 1 block, keep the intersection open, then switch to the other block and do that,
Thank you.
All right, we'll take one more question and then we will wrap up. So Ted asked, did any of your communities do any night work or Sundays? And Ted, are you talking about the construction teams or are you talking about the businesses?
Construction teams, yeah.
Okay.
No, we did not.
Mary said they could only work through to about 7 or 8 at night, no overnight work, and they didn't work Sundays. Okay.
We didn't have any evening work either. Despite our location in the northern part of the United States, our teams were able to work all winter long.
Wow. Yeah.
We didn't particularly limit them. They just don't normally do it unless it's an emergency situation.
Yeah, Ted, I think you're muted.
Mandy, when you guys shut down a whole block and you just got it done, versus shutting down one side of the street and the other, how much did that increase the production time or speed the project per se?
I don't know if I can give you a quantity off the top of my head, but I would definitely say it impacted because from a logistics, we saw that they had to go back a lot. It was much more than we anticipated. So the construction time ran over significantly, and I think they ran, which there were a lot of reasons it ran over, but I would say probably 50% increase in time over what we anticipated.
Us too.
Yeah. And well, we ran over more than that, but I would probably attribute 50% of that to the doing, flip-flop.
Wow.
Like we did.
That's significant. Well, this has been super helpful. Mary, Mandy, Andrea, are you willing for us to share your contact information if folks have follow-up questions?
Absolutely.
It's okay if the answer is no. No shame. Okay, great. So we'll distribute the shared Google folder. Anyone can drop things in that, add to it. We'll distribute our contact information if folks have follow-up questions. And this has been wonderful. And I love our radically rural community. Thanks for being here. And I hope to see you at a future roundtable or at our summit, or yeah, just come visit us in Keene, New Hampshire. All right. Have a great day, everyone.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Mary, Mandy, Andrea.